Right, so hello and welcome back to Books and Things, and welcome to my February wrap-up. So today I'm going to talk you through the books I read in the month of February. I read 7 books this month, which was not that many, and not that many for me, but apparently that is the pattern that my reading is going in. However, 4 out of the 7 books I read did have more than 400 pages, so I feel like I did get through some slightly longer books than I might have done previously. So anyway, I really enjoyed most of the books that I read this month, so I'm excited to tell you about them. So to start off, as always, with the classics, the Victorian novel I read in the month of February was Ruth by Elizabeth Gaskell, which I really enjoyed. I buddy read this with Kate Howe, which was really interesting and really great to discuss it together and talk through the book as we were reading it, and I really did enjoy it a lot. I love Elizabeth Gaskell's novels. This is the 5th one I've read, I think. If you count Cranford as a novel rather than a novella, this is the 5th novel of hers that I've read, and the only novel I have left now of hers to read is Sylvia's Lovers. I've read all the rest of her novels, and I'm going to be buddy reading Sylvia's Lovers this month with Ange from Beyond the Pages and also Alicia from Ex Libris. So at the end of March, by the end of March, I should have read all of Elizabeth Gaskell's novels, which is really sad but also quite exciting, and means that this year, as well as being a Hardy week at some point, there should also be a Gaskell author week. Anyway, back to Ruth. Ruth is a very interesting Elizabeth Gaskell novel. It deals a lot with kind of morality and, in a way, sexuality as well. So the main character, Ruth, at the beginning of the novel is about 15 years old. She's an apprentice seamstress. She's very, very beautiful, and there is a gentleman in the town who takes a fancy to her and ends up persuading her to run away with him. She ends up being a typical kind of Victorian fallen woman living with him outside of marriage. Quite early on in the book, he leaves her and she ends up on her own in a terrible situation, being completely disrespected by society, about to have a child outside of wedlock. It reminded me in many ways of Hardy's Tess of the D'Urbervilles, but in fact it was written about 40 years before, and I feel like Thomas Hardy must have read this because it's so similar in many ways, and the themes it deals with are very, very similar. In a way, Ruth is a kind of more positive Tess of the D'Urbervilles. Like, obviously there's still a lot of grim, miserable stuff in there, but there is more human kindness in Ruth than there is in Tess of the D'Urbervilles, and I loved Ruth for that. I thought that was really interesting. I think the way the book looks at morality is really interesting, and the relationship between the siblings, the Bensons as a pair, and also the way they feel about Ruth is really clever. I also loved the servant to the Bensons, Sally. She is one of the best characters in all of Gaskell. She is absolutely hilarious. I think one of my favourite lines in the whole book is when Sally sees Ruth, who is like 16 years old and about to have a baby, and says, if I had been her mother, I would have given her a lollipop rather than a husband, which I just thought was wonderful. I did really like the way that Ruth looks at morality, and it also has some really interesting things to say about religion, and the way morality is used both in terms of Ruth's story and also in the stories of the other characters in the book, who all at times experience kind of moral issues. I thought it was just done really well and is a great book. So yes, I do heartily recommend Elizabeth Gaskell, and I'm so excited to read Sylvia's Lovers later this month. On to the contemporary novels I read this month. This month I listened on audiobook to the 6th book of Harry Potter, so I've just started now in March the 7th one, and hopefully I should finish that this month, which means finally I can make the video I have been planning to make for ages about why Dickens and J.K. Rowling are really similar. I'm so excited to make that. But anyway, in the month of February I finished listening to on audiobook the 6th Harry Potter book. I have read it before, but not for about 10 years, so I had forgotten quite a lot of stuff, and it is really good. I think the 6th might actually be one of my favourites so far from my reread. I think the 3rd and the 6th are probably my favourites, and I think I found Harry a much more likeable character in the 6th book, because he slightly annoys me in the 5th. He has lots of angst and he's kind of angry at everyone all the time, which is understandable but also a bit frustrating. And in the 6th book, I feel like it's when he's finally angry at the right people. Like, there's a bit where he just shouts at the Minister for Magic, and I'm like, yeah, go Harry. But yes, I did really enjoy that, and in general I just do like the 6th book. I think the whole device of the Half-Blood Prince is really interesting, and the end, though very, very sad, is very dramatic and well done, and yes, I do enjoy Harry Potter. In February I also read Fingersmith by Sarah Waters. Now I buddy read this with Marissa from Blatantly Bookish, and I will link her channel down below. This is a novel set in the Victorian period, and I guess it's kind of like a mystery or a thriller, I don't know. There's a lot of drama in here, like it's quite plot driven. It is very well written, it's really interestingly written, and the characters are done really well. Like, it's literary fiction in that sense, but my goodness, there are a lot of plot twists and a lot of drama. There were lots of things I really liked about Fingersmith. Like I said, the writing is good, and I thought the characters were done really well. Another thing I really love about it is how it plays both with like expectations of the Victorian period, and then also with like twisting them over and turning them around. It explores quite a lot of things that were taboo in the Victorian period. So for example, there are LGBT characters in here, and it also talks quite a lot about the Victorian porn industry, and there's like a lot of swearing, like all the characters swear all the time, which I kind of really like, because obviously like in the Victorian period people did still swear. It's just that when you read Victorian novels, because they were novels and they were printed, they didn't swear in the novels, so things like that I really enjoyed. I felt like possibly there were one too many plot twists. Like, there are times when it has so many twists it just feels like it's kind of mocking itself, but I kind of, by the end of the book, I think I had forgiven it that, because I loved the characters so much, and because I really enjoyed like the emotional strain of the characters and the relationships between them and the emotional complexity that many of the twists brought about. I kind of forgave the complicated twists. So I feel like the plot was a bit insane, but I kind of didn't mind because the writing and the characters were so good and I enjoyed the historical setting. Also, there's like a reference to Dickens on like the first page, so yes, I approve. Then I also read The Singer's Gun by Emily St. John Mandel. This was, I think, the first book I read in February. I have already spoken about this because I made a author spotlight on Emily St. John Mandel a week ago, 2 weeks ago, which I will link down below. So I did already speak about this at length there, and I also talked about all the reasons why this author is possibly my favourite contemporary author. She might beat John McGregor, and she is very, very awesome. I love this book. Like, I love all of hers. She writes wonderfully, she's very dramatic. She has the perfect balance of plot and characters and good writing. This is about Anton Waker. His family run an antique shop selling antiques, most of which are stolen, and his cousin Arya gets him involved quite early on in their lives in various criminal activities. He wants to escape from this, and all he really wants to be is a corporate person working in an office, and he manages to get that life he wants, but he's always kind of haunted by all his illegal past, especially because it's so caught up in his family, and he kind of gets caught up with it again, and at the same time there is like a detective looking into his background, and yes, it's very, very dramatic. Many mysterious things go on here. It's not my favourite out of her 4 novels, but it's still really, really brilliant and one of the best books I've read because she is just such a talented writer. I highly recommend. I also read All the Light We Cannot See by Anthony Doerr, which I buddy read with Leanne Rose, and I will link her channel down below. Do go and watch her because she is very brilliant. This book was talked about quite a lot on Booktube a few years ago, and there was a lot of hype about it, and then it's kind of died down, and I think I'm kind of glad that I read it now rather than at the hype, because I'd forgotten what people were saying about it. Like, I knew it was set in the Second World War, and that was basically all I remembered. All the Light We Cannot See follows the story of 2 characters during the Second World War. One of them, Werner, is a boy growing up in Nazi Germany. He ends up going to school and ends up being in the army. And then the other half of the narrative, it's a dual narrative, is about a girl called Marie-Laure who is about the same age, I think 2 years younger than Werner, and she is blind. She's growing up in Paris with her father. When the war starts, they leave Paris and they run away, but they end up caught in occupied France during the Second World War. There were a lot of things that I loved about this book. One thing is the writing. I think it's beautifully written. He can write amazingly. I loved the writing. I had no flaws with it at all. I think there are some very like powerful, emotive, dramatic moments which are written superbly, where they could have been overdone so easily and then not, and I think the writing throughout is really well done. I think the way he describes Marie-Laure's blindness is done very well as well, and in a really interesting way. Most chapters are only like 2 pages, very rarely more than 4, and I really liked that. I thought that made it very digestible, and also because you flip between Werner and Marie-Laure really regularly, it means that you are encouraged to like compare their lives in a really interesting way. I feel like I've read a lot about Britain during the Second World War. I've read quite a bit about Russia during the Second World War, and also I've read quite a few books set in Germany during the Second World War. I've never read anything set in France during the Second World War, and certainly never anything set in occupied France during the Second World War, so that aspect of the plot I found really, really interesting. There were 2 reasons though why this wasn't 5 stars. Like, writing and characterisation, it was 5 stars for me, but I gave it 4 stars, and there were 2 things that kind of let it down for me. One is the plot. So Marie-Laure's father works in a museum where there is this kind of epic diamond that is supposed to have a curse attached to it, and he and various other people are given like a copy of the diamond, or there's 5 copies and no one knows who has the actual diamond. And then there is another character who is a Nazi soldier who is travelling around France collecting valuable artefacts and is kind of on the hunt for this diamond, and that provokes this kind of dramatic plot, and it just was nowhere near as good as the rest of the book. It just felt a bit silly. That's the problem, because it's this kind of chasing after this mythical diamond. It just felt a bit silly, and it was so annoying because the rest of the book is so brilliant and so well done, and then there was just this kind of aspect of the plot that just wasn't as good as the rest of it. I didn't feel it was necessary. Like, there is enough plot of the fact that their lives are in danger and that they're in a war zone, and like their lives are plot enough without this kind of extra diamond drama thrown in, so I didn't really love that. And I also felt the ending was a bit weird. It felt like it could have ended quite a bit sooner, and there's quite a lot of like extra stuff after what I felt was the actual ending that you didn't really need, and I don't really know why it was there. There were so many things I loved about this, and there were just 2 things that irritated me. It was good. It was. I would recommend it, just the characters and the writing are better than the plot. But anyway. Then I also finished a short story collection this month, which was Mia Alvar's In the Country. I actually started this in January during the Try a Story tag, and then I've read it kind of slowly over the last 2 months. And I'm glad that I spent longer on this, because actually it's one of those short story collections where, like, often the kind of short stories I read, often the kind of short stories I enjoy are snapshots, and I like that. But every story in here feels like it has the weight of a novel behind it. It reminded me more, actually, of short stories I've read from kind of the mid-20th century than, like, contemporary short stories. Like, it reminded me more of Mavis Gallant or Adora Welty. I did love this a lot. I gave it 5 stars and it was one of my favourite books of the month. Probably my favourite book along with The Singer's Gun, and I thought it was absolutely beautiful. I heard about this book first from Weena Wonders. I'll link her channel down below. She's one of my absolute favourite booktubers, and she shouted this out so much as being an incredible short story collection, and I did really love it. So Mia Alvar is from the Philippines, and the book explores people who are either living in the Philippines or who are from the Philippines living abroad, and it's just done so well. Like I said, every short story feels like it has the weight of a novel behind it, in that all of the characters are so thoroughly, fully developed. I like the juxtaposition in this short story collection as a whole between small domestic moments and the history of the Philippines and the history of the world as a whole. Like the final story, the title story, In the Country, is wonderful for being a story that is both about the political history of the Philippines, but also about the life story of one woman, and it's done in a way that is brilliant. I also loved Shadow Families, which is all told, I don't even know what the perspective is called, rather than being told in I or she, it's told in we, and it's told from a collective perspective, which is just so well done. Like, I don't know how she pulls it off. Or Esmeralda, which is just one of the most heartbreakingly beautiful things I've ever read. Like, there are so many incredible stories in here that I loved. It's so well written, it's so interestingly written, every story is different. I would highly, highly recommend this book. I think it's brilliantly written and just a wonderful, wonderful short story collection. Fascinating in terms of the history of the Philippines, but also just in itself, it's so well written, it's so beautifully done, and the characters are so strong, and each individual story so poignant and moving in its own way. So yes, I do recommend this. It's a really, really great book. Finally, I also read this, which is Ethel and Ernest, which Nick gave me for our anniversary. This is a graphic novel by Raymond Briggs, or maybe I should say like a graphic biography, because Raymond Briggs is the guy, the illustrator who created The Snowman, which I don't know if it's like massively popular and seen outside of the UK, but it's like the most famous Christmas film, and it's got Walking in the Air and there's a snowman. It's beautiful. I don't know, maybe it's a worldwide thing. Anyway, he is the creator of that, and this is a graphic novel he wrote about his parents and how they met and their lives, and it's beautiful. One, in terms of like the art. Like, the art feels really nice and stylized and old-fashioned, which I really like. This graphic novel captures so well the whole history of a country by looking at one married couple, and it does it so well. Even just like when they're talking about like getting a fridge or getting a TV and the different things they bring into their home, and they live in the same house, this couple, for like over 40 years, and the way that their house changes and what they have in their house changes demonstrates like what's going on in the world at large and how like technology and society's evolving, and that was wonderful. I love that. Another thing I really enjoyed was the way this book deals with politics. So Ethel likes the Conservative Party and Ernest likes the Labour Party, and they have these little short debates about it that are done really well, which normally involve, like, say the Labour Party is in power and the Labour Party make rationing more harsh, then Ethel will be like, well, that's what your party did, and then Ernest does the same when the Conservatives are in power and put up the rationing. And I just thought that was like so clever and felt so true to life. And likewise, the fact that we managed to hear so much about like the world at large and what's going on in politics through these people who don't know that much about politics and often aren't that interested, especially Ethel, but you still get to find out about the world through the story. I just thought it was so cleverly done. Like, it takes a lot of skill, I think, to tell a really long, grand narrative through a small domestic narrative, but at the same time keep that domestic narrative really poignant and beautiful. Like, it's about their whole lives, and the end of the book is really moving, and it's done really well. Yes, I did really enjoy this, and I would recommend it. I also now have the film on DVD, so I'm going to try and watch that soon, because I look forward to it. So those are all the things that I read in the month of February. I hope you had a good reading month. Let me know what your favourite book of the month was, and I'll be back very soon with another bookish video.